We want to thank MSA at UIC for hosting this workshop. We're here to give a short presentation on what your rights are when encountering law enforcement when protesting. We are doing these presentations because we work with communities and movements that have faced scrutiny by law enforcement as part of the so-called national security investigation. The presentation will have 3 parts. First, we'll discuss guidelines to follow when being approached by law enforcement in general. Then we'll discuss your rights when protesting. Then we will give you some basic guidelines about dealing with law enforcement while protesting. We'll do activities to practice asserting our rights throughout, and we encourage your participation. We'll also stay afterwards to answer specific questions individually. Feel free to ask us questions using the chat option in the Zoom. We'll also have material that will drop in the Zoom chat that will pertain to the information we discussed today. So our background. So there is a long history in this country of law enforcement surveilling communities under the guise of national security, going back to the communists in the 1920s, Black activists in the 60s and 70s, post 9/11 in Muslim communities, and a long history of surveillance and repression in response to events in Palestine. We know that organizers are surveilled and policed by government agencies today. This is not just part of the history. This is an ongoing history in our present day too. This training will be just one piece of empowering your community to navigate this landscape. And this KYR training covers your legal rights as they exist on paper. It is intended to provide you with legal parameters to inform your political and strategic decision-making so you can make well-informed decisions.
Okay, and with that, we're going to start off with general law enforcement encounters. So the first question I want to ask everyone, and this is something that you can put in the chat, who or what is law enforcement? So using the chat box, type in whatever you think of. Don't be shy. Any answer goes. Police officers. Let's get some variety. We have a lot of police officers, which is a great instinct. FBI, amazing. Police, again. Anything else? ICE is a good one. A good example. Sorry, not a good one necessarily. Any other takers? Okay, so as you will see now on the screen, here are a bunch of different examples of law enforcement. I think a lot of us got the police department, right? We have the city of New York up here because Claire is a New York law school organization, but in Chicago, it would be the Chicago PD, right? We have the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Drug Enforcement Administration, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives, United States Marshal, US Customs and Border Protection, someone said US Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, and Homeland Security. So all of these law enforcement agencies operate on the local, municipal, state, and federal levels, right? We have the police departments, which are specifically local law enforcement agencies. And we also have the FBI, which operates on a federal level. However, the important thing to remember is that even though these badges are separate, they work together. But whenever you encounter any of these agencies, the same rules will apply regardless of the agency. But the reason why we tell you to make note of agency, and we'll say this often, try to remember what agency they're from, is to make follow-up easier. So the next question I'm going to ask everyone is, why do you think law enforcement questions people? And again, you can put this into the chat. Just think of maybe possible reasons why. Investigation, that's a good one. To get a confession, yes. To gather info in general is good, yes, to gather info in general. to get information. Do we have others? Identify suspects, to suspect people, to possibly implicate someone. These are all really great. Yeah, so I think you guys basically, to prevent crimes, you guys basically covered a lot of them. So the first one is you may be suspected of involvement in some crime, right? So they think that you robbed the bodega down the street. You could, they could also be using you as a witness. You saw the person robbing the bodega down the road. But a lot of these times it's intelligence gathering, or as someone was saying, to get information and to gather information in general, or otherwise known as phishing. And a lot of time police are doing this. They're just fishing for information without any particular suspicion of criminal activity. So in the context of movement repression or counterinsurgency, which Sammy talked about earlier, they may be seeking intel on movements, key high-profile organizers, and internal organizational practices. Now, when law enforcement approaches you, you may think that you have nothing to hide, so there's no harm in talking with law enforcement. However, there's several things that are wrong with like this assumption, and I just want to try to debunk that right now. So, agreeing to talk to law enforcement actually opens up the doors to more problems for you and your family and your community, because there's this common perception that if you talk to an officer, you'll appease them and it'll make them go away. But actually, the opposite happens. Once officers know that you're willing to talk, they keep coming back to you as a source of information for your community. So, like if an FBI officer approaches me and is like, Christine, we want to talk to you, and I give them what they want, they're not thinking, oh, Hershini has done her job. You know, she's amazing. We're going to never bother her again. They're thinking, wow, Hershini is like a really good resource and everyone else isn't talking to us. So we're going to go to Hershini over and over again so she can keep giving us information like about this community. So some examples of different things that you might be asked by law enforcement might include, what do you think about what is going on in Gaza? Do you know anyone who is protesting about Gaza? Do you know anyone in your school's MSA? Are you a member of any Muslim groups? What kind of activities do these groups do? Do you know Mossad, etc.? So, having said all that, again, put in the chat, if the FBI comes to your door or stops you on the street to ask you questions, why is it better not to speak to them unless your lawyer is present with you? And yeah, feel free to type in the chat. Because they could twist something you say and take out of the context. They can use what you say against you. Entrapment. These are all very good. Any other ideas? We might want to think about everything said is recorded. When we say recorded, yeah, we don't mean like necessarily there's a camera, but yes, like police are taking note of everything that you say and it could be used against you, you know, later on. So yes, that is a good instinct. If any of you are non-citizens, can anyone think of maybe consequences that could come from that? Yeah. Deportation. Close. Okay, so revoke visa. Yes, so there are three categories of potential consequences. A lot of people have talked about the criminal consequences, right? So, how many of you, and you can just type yes or no in the chat, how many of you think that it is a crime to lie to law enforcement? And yeah, just say yes or no in the chat. Yes, 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 yes. A lot of yeses, right? Because, yeah, it is a crime to lie to law enforcement. Now, let's go for the reverse. How many of you think that it is a crime for law enforcement to lie to you? And again, you can put yes or no in the chat, starting now. No, yes, no, yes, no. Oh, this one's a bit more mixed, right? So we have some no's. It's probably not, but it should be. Yes, I agree. It is not a crime for law enforcement to lie to you, which, as someone has said in the chat, isn't the greatest. But essentially, that can be summarized as they can lie to you, but you cannot lie to them. And if you misremember something or forget something, they can turn around and use that against you. Someone in the chat mentioned entrapment. And this is one of the ways that it happens. You know, people will misremember things or forget things. And then the agent will be like, but you said da 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 da. And then lo and behold, you are trapped. Officers know the law better than you do. Even if you think that you've done nothing wrong, it's likely that the police can find something to use against you. And then next, moving on to potential immigration consequences. A lot of you mentioned specific actions, such as the revoking of visas, deportations. These are all examples of what could happen. Basically, any slight inconsistency between what you tell them, right, tell an FBI officer, and what you've put on a prior application for immigration benefits can be used to pressure you. So if an FBI officer comes up to you and asks, hey, what day did you enter the US? And you say, May 25th, 1999. But in actuality, you entered May 26th, 1999. That is an inconsistency, and that can be used later on to deny you immigration benefits or in a removal proceedings. We've also seen that people who do engage with law enforcement become ensnared into programs that subject their immigration applications to heightened scrutiny, where the goal is to find any pretext to deny the application. So if you do speak to law enforcement, you can expect that you may be questioned about what you say in this interview when seeking immigration benefits down the line. Finally, there's like this big unknown category. And that's one, you can unknowingly get others into trouble. And as activists and organizers, you represent the movement. So other information about organizers, your organization, and any larger structures could be compromised. And the fact is, we can try to speculate about why law enforcement is asking questions and how they're going to report the info and how they might use it, but we simply don't know the answers to that. Because law enforcement officers will write down what they think you said, and their version of what happened, even if it's missing facts or context, is probably going to be presumed true if ever taken before a court. That is why the best thing that you can say is nothing. So.
And we could go to the next slide. And the guidelines we're going to share with you guys today. So we're sharing information that we think will help protect you, but we acknowledge that the reality of how law enforcement acts may differ. This is not a formula, but this is things that we've seen that are helpful. We still believe it is useful to use this information regardless of how law enforcement acts. So there are 3 golden rules. So first, we will go over what to do if they come to you at your door at home. So rule number 1, do not open the door. If you can, only speak through the door. Do not open it. You can look through the peephole. You might have a Ring camera at home with a speaker. You could talk to them through that. An upstairs window. If you could talk to them through the upstairs window, you could talk to them to the side window. You don't want to open the door in essence. So however you can talk to them without opening the door is best practice. And first thing you do when you first question you would ask would be do you have a warrant? Can I see your ID? Do you have a business card? There are 2 ways for law enforcement to get in, and that would be through a warrant, a search warrant, a valid search warrant, or if you consent. So for a warrant, it needs to have 3 things. It must include your name or your address, the date, a valid date, meaning it's not like a date that was 1 year ago prior, and then they send it to come to your house now. It should be within a reasonable time. And the judge's signature. Um, ICE warrants or admin warrants by ICE, not signed by a judge. This means you do not have to let them into your home if they only have an ICE warrant, as they do not give any permission to search your property. So if you're a non-citizen without a valid immigration status, you should be especially careful if ICE agents show up to your door claiming they have a warrant, because it is likely that it won't be a valid warrant. And then the next slide will show you those three things that we talk about. So this is an example of a valid warrant. You can see at the top it says United States District Court. So this is one, and then there's like the next slide. There's the date. There's, you see that's a proper date because it's not and then there's a to not exceed 14 days. So there's a valid, I guess this would be a valid date or an example of what a valid date would look like. And then the next slide, this would show the judge's signature, which is important. So you need to, when law enforcement comes to your door, you ask them if they have a warrant, a valid search warrant. You would look for those three things that the screen just showed. And then if you absolutely have to open the door in order to hear/talk to them, it's important to step outside quickly and close the door fully behind you. So the problem with talking to them through the doorway, even if it's a crack, they could step their foot in and force it open wider and step inside themselves. If this does happen, do not physically resist, but do say loudly and clearly, I do not consent for you to come inside. I do not consent to this search. If they ask you anything else, so if they're asking you any questions while they're inside your house, or they get inside your house for some whatever reason, you want to assert that right really clearly, that you do not consent to this search. And law enforcement will always ask you directly to enter. It can be in the way of, can we just come in and talk? Or it could be a demanding tone and say, let us in. But remember that they can lie to you, and they'll say a lot of things to get you to let them inside, essentially. So some examples of lies that law enforcement have told clear clients to get inside their homes would be things like, we need help with a criminal investigation. We're looking for a suspect. We want you to look at a photo, etc. We're trying to help the victim of identity fraud/theft. And the worst one is, we received a call about a child abused in this household and we need to verify. So you can see really how shady and what type of heart-wrenching ways that law enforcement will try to get someone's consent. And that's just some examples. So the next slide. This is an example of an invalid warrant. So like we talked about before, at the top it says United States Department of Homeland Security. And it's a warrant for an arrest, but it's not a proper search warrant. There's no judge name, there's no date, there's no name or address. So this is what an invalid warrant would look like. Next slide. And rule number 2 is, do not speak to law enforcement without a lawyer present. So law enforcement wants to talk to you. They want to ask you some questions. Things you can say to them is, I won't answer any questions without my lawyer. I prefer not to answer any questions without my lawyer. Or if anything, through the door, you could say, I will have my lawyer contact you. This is true no matter what, even if they have a warrant and are already inside your home for whatever reason. They may press you and say, like, this will only take a few minutes. We just want to chat, or, ask you, why do you even need a lawyer? So you can just repeat yourself in this situation, and hint, you will be repeating yourself in a lot of these things, is you would insert one of those, I will not answer any questions without my lawyer. You can contact my lawyer. I'm not talking to you without a lawyer, etc. Next slide. And golden rule number 3 is, do not give permission for a search. You can say, I do not consent to this search. Do not consent to letting them in and searching your house, apartment, or belongings. and again, repeating yourself if they do come in is, I do not consent. I do not give you permission. I do not consent to this search. I don't give permission to this search. Repeating yourself. However, you may not be able to prevent this, and you should physically not resist. So you shouldn't resist physically. Still, don't volunteer it don't volunteer it and make it explicit but present to yourself that you do not consent to this search. Be very clear in any way or how you would present that fact. Say, I do not consent. I do not give permission, and try to avoid any physical confrontation by resisting. A good rule of thumb is that if they're asking for your consent, it's because they need it for their conduct to be lawful. Bear in mind that them asking for consent won't always be, can I please enter? It could also be, unlock your door, let me in, we just want to talk. So again, you would not consent to that. You would repeat yourself, I do not consent to this search, and you would not consent to them coming into your home. And so the next slide, an important note for this law enforcement encounters at your home is that if you are home, you're not required to confirm your name or provide them with ID. So this is especially important for households with mixed immigration statuses. So someone can be undocumented or someone can be documented. You don't want to consent to allow the law enforcement to come inside. You want to make sure that they have a valid search warrant, but in circumstances where your household is of mixed immigration status, do not give them consent to come into your house. Next slide. So these are the 3 golden rules. Again, when law enforcement comes to your house asking for questions, do not open the door. Ask for a business card so you don't have to deal with them. And rule number 2: do not submit to questioning without a lawyer present. You would repeat yourself in that phrase, I will not talk to you without a lawyer. I'm not going to answer any questions without my lawyer. And number 3 is, do not consent to a search of your home. You would insert your privilege and I do not consent to this. I do not give you permission. And those are the 3 golden rules to think about and keep in mind when law enforcement approaches you at your house. Next slide. So we're going to do a role-playing encounter. We're going to act out a scenario where FBI visits your home. Harshini is going to be the FBI agent visiting me at my home. And, we'll show you how this would work.
Great. Okay, so I'll begin now. Knock, knock, knock.
Hi, can I help you?
Hi, are you Sammy?
Yeah.
Hi, Sammy. I'm from the FBI. May I come in to ask you a few questions?
I guess so. Come on in.
So, do you know anyone by the name of Ahmed?
Oh, yeah, we're friends. We go to the same mosque.
I see. Well, I hear that he's very active in the community and he's made a lot of speeches at different events. Are you at all affiliated with the groups that he works with?
Yeah, sort of. We're friends, so we go out a lot to the same meetings.
How often do you go to those meetings?
Not that often. He drags me along sometimes.
Do you agree with the statements that he's made?
What do you mean?
Do you agree with the statements that he's made about what's happening in Gaza?
I'm not sure what you're referring to.
Please answer the questions truthfully.
Well, we're not really that good of friends.
You do know that it's a crime to lie to a federal agent, right?
Uh,
You mind if I look around
I guess not.
and see? So, let's debrief. What could Sammy have done differently? And feel free to type in the chat. Sorry, I should have mentioned that. Everything. Not open the door. Everything. Not reply. He should not have let them in. He shouldn't have said his name. Don't snitch on your friend. I was waiting for that one, guys. So thank you. Not let the police in. Talk without a lawyer. Yes. yeah, if we want to summarize the feedback to Sammy, it's he forgot all the golden rules, right? As people are saying, he opened the door, right? He let the police in. He started speaking to me without a lawyer. And the last one, right? He should not have allowed for a house search. He let me search his house. Um, so overall, Sammy did not remember the golden rules. And also, it's important that even if Sammy let me in at the beginning and he talked to me, he could have still asserted the last golden rule because you're allowed to assert these rights at any point in their interaction. So just because you forget at the beginning, it's not like, oh crap, like I didn't assert my rights, you know, way back then, because like you can always assert them. So now what we're going to do is if people want to volunteer, we want to do it with one of you guys. And you guys can try applying the golden rules yourself. I do want to remind people that the meeting is recorded in case that factors into anyone's decision. But yeah, whoever wants to volunteer. Oh, and I'll be the FBI agent again. So I'll be nice, hopefully. You can raise your hands, I think, to volunteer. It will be fun.
I can volunteer.
Great. Okay. So I'll start then. Okay. Knock, knock, knock.
Hello, who's there?
Hi, I'm Agent Hirshini from the FBI. May I come in?
No, I'm not speaking without a lawyer present.
Are you sure? It will only take a few minutes.
No, I won't speak without a lawyer present.
I mean, I know that you know Ahmed, and this would really take only like max 10 minutes. Just trust me.
If you'd like, I can have my lawyer contact you if you can give me your card, and that's about it.
Okay. I'll end it there because that was a really good response, right? Because obviously the first thing that you should say is like, no, I won't speak without a lawyer. But I was being pretty pushy, sorry. And so saying like, I'll have my lawyer contact you. Or alternatives that we've also seen is like, leave me your business card. I'll have my lawyer call you at a later time. Are all good alternatives to, get the finalize the conversation and get people moving. So that was really great. Thank you for volunteering. I think we can move on to the next slide because I am the one presenting. Okay, so now we're going to be covering rights while protesting. Your rights while protesting are covered under the First Amendment, which is on the next slide. This is this text as it appears in the Constitution, and it's a great First Amendment. But it generally protects your right to engage in protest and political speech. However, the government can limit where and how political protests are made. And these rights cover anyone in the United States, regardless of citizenship or immigration status. However, non-citizens may face other complications and risks in terms of their immigration status. So, for example, if you're arrested at a protest, that impacts non-citizens and citizens differently. If you are a non-citizen, we advise consulting with us, Clear, or another immigration attorney when subsequently seeking any immigration benefits because you may be required to disclose affiliations with organizations, or you may be asked about your protest-related activity. This does not mean that anyone who is a non-citizen should feel constrained to exercise First Amendment rights because anyone on US territory is protected by these rights. When we mentioned that, there might be different consequences for non-citizens, we are simply trying to warn you of possible consequences so you can take those into account and be safe when you're exercising these essential rights. So, to start off, what is always within your right to do? And we have the next slide. Yes. So you may always march on the sidewalk. This is as long as you do not block pedestrian traffic or police access. In a public space, you have the right to photograph anything in plain view, and this includes federal buildings and the police. However, you should be sure to do so safely, because if you are in a tense confrontation with a cop and you quickly pull out your phone without saying anything, that could escalate the situation and cause it to be more dangerous. And under the law, police may not confiscate or demand to view your photographs or videos without a warrant, nor may they delete data under any circumstances. However, in practice, this still might happen. And as you said before, you should not resist physically because of the risk of escalation, arrest, or violence towards you. And the next one is you can exercise your right to free speech. Yay. This means that most speech is protected under the US Constitution as long as it does not incite or encourage imminent violence. So you can even advocate for a group that is designated as a foreign terrorist organization without risk of facing criminal liability for material support charges, as long as you're doing this advocacy independently and not under the direction or control of that organization. And you also have the right to distribute pamphlets and flyers and also hold a protest sign. However, as you can see in the no category, protest signs cannot be held up by wood sticks or metal poles. So some alternatives that we've seen are cardboard or plastic. And the rights that we've discussed before, the First Amendment rights, cover anyone in the United States regardless of citizenship or immigration status. However, as we'll see in the next slide, certain types of speech and association can adversely affect a non-citizen's immigration status and or create the risk of a denial of future immigration benefit applications. So what are some types of speech that you can engage in? The first one is statements in solidarity with Palestine or the people of Gaza. Free Palestine, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. This is an acceptable, statement. Next would be statements expressing opposition to Zionism. Zionism is a settler colonial apartheid project. This is okay to say. Statements criticizing the Israeli or United States government. The Israeli and US governments are committing crimes against humanity. Again, also okay to say. Statements calling attention to the genocide taking place in Gaza. End the genocide in Gaza. Definitely okay. And finally, statements which reflect the general right of Palestinian people to resist occupation. Palestinians have a right to self-defense. This is okay. However, there are some types of speech that could create a risk for non-citizens. First, inciting, advocating, or declaring public approval of, or support of, or persuading others to advocate or declare public approval or support of terrorist activity. And there's advocating or declaring public approval or support of, or persuading others to advocate or declare public approval or support for a terrorist organization. And then finally, soliciting funds for terrorist activity or terrorist organizations. When we define terrorist activity and terrorist organization, these terms are defined very broadly. For example, terrorist activity isn't just including many acts such as the taking of hostages, assassinations, or the use of any weapons to endanger the safety of others or cause substantial damage to property, but it also includes threat, attempt, or conspiracy to do so. And similarly, for terrorist organizations, it doesn't just include federally designated federal foreign terrorist organizations that are actually designated, such as Hamas, but it also includes any organizations that engage in terrorist activity. That's my bad. I don't know why the door suddenly did that. But continuing on, so if you are a non-citizen, we advise you to consider utilizing your social media privacy settings. And if you are, as we've said before, if you are a non-citizen who has exercised these First Amendment rights to associate with any organization or a specific cause, consider consulting an attorney. That could be CLEAR or another immigration attorney before applying for any immigration benefits in the future. Now, moving on, what are you legally never allowed to do? Number one, bring any weapons, including concealed weapons and knives. Knives that with blades longer than 3 inches, butterfly knives, and switchblades are all illegal in Illinois. Next, interfering with so-called legitimate police activity. You may still monitor and observe from a safe distance, but interfering might mean like getting in the way of officers making arrests or questioning people or blocking their way. These are all like interference, and this is something you're not allowed to do. Next, altering public or private property without a permit or permission of the owner. So this could include forms of wheat pasting, graffiti, and damage to property. And beyond not being able to do these things under the law, you may face federal penalties for engaging in these activities. And then finally, what things can you technically only do with a permit? So sound amplification is the first one. You need a permit to use loudspeakers or microphones. And next, marching in a public street. This is different from marching on a sidewalk. As you might remember, marching on a sidewalk is allowed. However, if you're marching in the street, you need a permit for that. And if you are deciding to go to a protest, there are several things that you can do and not bring to minimize risk. And when we talk about risk here, we're talking about a risk of 1, heightened surveillance, 2, legal repercussions, and 3, the compromising of sensitive and private information. So first and foremost, your phone. Consider not bringing your phone. But if you do decide to bring your phone, on the next slide, we have some suggestions on what to do. So first and foremost, keep it locked and set it on immediate auto lock. When you have a secure password, you want to make sure that you're using a string of no less than 15 letters and numbers, and staying away from obvious passwords like password and 12345. And do not share your password with anyone. And next, you want to disable biometrics, your fingerprints and your facial scans. This is because, according to the law, the police can obtain a warrant forcing you to unlock your phone with fingerprint or face ID, but they can't do the same to force you to provide a device's password or code. Next, you want to turn off location services. This is your GPS, NFC, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi. Sometimes photos and videos will have geographical data in them. So if there's anything on your phone that you don't want police to access, password protect those files on top of the password protecting your phone. And make sure that certain messaging apps, which may contain more sensitive info, including Signal, are password protected. Again, if there's anything at all on your phone you do not want the police to access, it is always best not to bring it. If you are live streaming or posting photos from protests publicly, please take steps to block out protesters' faces so they are not identifiable. And either 1, post a screenshot of the photo rather than the photo itself to avoid inadvertently sharing metadata, or 2, strip the photo of all its metadata. So the NYPD and different police precincts have powerful facial recognition technology, and they've been known to do shady things to lock down a match. And finally, as we said before in this presentation, review your social media privacy settings. And then going back to the last slide, what not to bring to a protest, right? Other electronic devices, computers, tablets, don't bring them. Weapons, even legal knives, aka under 3 inches. Illicit drugs, so substances. This includes the substances that may be legal in Illinois because they might be illegal on the federal level. So an example would be marijuana. And finally, don't bring politically or organizationally sensitive materials such as books, papers, notes, hard drives, and USBs. Yeah.
So contact with law enforcement. So what happens when law enforcement comes is at a protest, or what if you're at a protest and a cop suddenly stops you? These are some things we learned to do. So the next slide. So the first things first is when law enforcement comes up to you and approaches you during a protest, the first thing is to remain calm and do not physically resist or engage in any sort of physical contact. Obviously this is easier said than done, and frankly, whether it changes anything likely depends on a lot of factors, including the color of your skin, your identity. But our goal in giving you this information and giving you this advice is to get you out of the situation as safely as possible. So you're stopped. First thing you should ask is, am I free to leave? Law enforcement are not supposed to detain or arrest you without reasonable suspicion that you have committed, are in the process of committing, or about to commit a criminal act. Reasonable suspicion is a specific legal standard that we're not going to get into. But what we know is that law enforcement officers often abuse this power and detain people without that required reasonable suspicion, especially Black and brown folk. So if you ask if you're free to leave and they say yes, great, walk away. Um, if they don't say anything, or if they say anything other than yes, or like a no, a blank stare, an ambiguous answer, like what's an example of ambiguous answer? You ask if I can leave, they tell you to just hold on. They say I don't know about that. Anything in that sense, stay put. If they do not respond, you can repeat that question again, but try to do so when you repeat, am I free to leave, in a very calm and non-confrontational tone. So in Illinois, if you are out on a street and in public, you do not have to provide your name or identification if a law enforcement officer asks. However, the police can take you to a precinct to verify your identity if you do not give them your name. So if you do provide them with ID, we suggest providing an ID with the least amount of information on it as possible. So what does that look like? That can be a library card. It can be your student ID. And if it's your college ID, it's your college ID. If it's your high school ID and you still have that on you, you can show them that, as very minimal information is supposed to be given when you give them your ID. So if you are not a citizen, this is specifically important, do not provide a foreign ID that shows that you were not born in the United States. And if you are undocumented or otherwise at risk for deportation, confirming your name to ICE is enough for them to arrest you. Because of this, if you are undocumented, it is extra important to give them an ID that would not reveal your documentation status or shows your place of birth. And it's also important to keep this in mind when making decisions on whether or how to participate in direct action that might be heavily policed. Do not answer any questions. You can just say, golden rule number 2. I won't answer any questions without a lawyer present. I won't talk to you without a lawyer present. So, like I said, repetition is important, and it's gonna feel uncomfortable to repeat yourself as often as you do to law enforcement, but be prepared to sound like a broken record with, I'm not talking to you without a lawyer. When they stop you on the street, you get ready to repeat that am I being detained question. Because if you keep asking and they're not really answering you, that means you're doing something right. So be prepared to sound like a broken record when facing confrontation from law enforcement, whether at home and on the street. Next slide. So if you feel comfortable, ask the police officer for their information, including a business card and or a badge number, and ask what crime you are suspected of committing, or in that question. So in New York, as well as in Illinois and Chicago, the NYPD and the Chicago PD, they're required to provide, the police officers are required to provide their name, rank, command, and shield number, as well as carry business cards with that information. And the situation varies on how the interaction is going. So we recognize how things are supposed to go, but often they do not go that way. So if you feel comfortable, you should ask them to give them your business card. Ask them for their business card. But if they don't have it, or they're not giving it to you, or they're being very rude in any shape or way, if there's a badge number you can see along with their name, it's best to try to memorize that. So if the situation escalates and you end up being detained or arrested, so number 1, even if you feel like your rights are being violated. So if you feel like your rights are being violated when you're in the moment, to make sure you're safe, do not resist arrest. So do not physically resist. And you can report it. You can report that assault, like how they're being very physical with you, and you're not resisting, but they're still being physical. You can report that to the Civilian Review Board or to an attorney like Clear afterwards. And if you haven't done so already, ask the officer for his information, including his business card, what crime you're suspected of committing. And it's important, do not say anything else to them besides asking for their name, what's the suspicion of you committing a crime, what's that suspicion they have. Uh just say those things. So do not say anything else to them. Do not say anything else to yourself, to anyone else around you that could be fellow arrestees, including while in their custody, but presumably outside the physical presence of officers. This includes when you're detained and sitting on a curb in the street, when you're in a police van, or locked up in holding. You simply do not know who you're talking to, who is around, and who is listening to you. Number two, if it escalates into detention or arrest, immediately and clearly assert your right to counsel. Say, I'm not going to say or do anything without my lawyer. If they keep questioning you, keep repeating yourself. I won't talk to you without my lawyer. I'm not going to speak to you without my lawyer. I'm not answering any questions without my lawyer. Any way, shape, or form that you can say to assert that right to counsel is very important. Invoking your right in this way has legal significance in later potential criminal proceedings because you are not leaving any ambiguity for the police or prosecutors to say down the line, well, they didn't ask for a lawyer or they voluntarily spoke to us. So clearly assert your right to counsel. If we were together in a physical auditorium, I would ask you all to say, I'm not going to say anything without my lawyer present. So type it in the chat. I'm not going to say anything without my lawyer present, and practice it now to yourselves. I'm not going to talk to you without my lawyer present. Do give them the phone number of your attorney. It can be clear. So you could put down our phone number, which you should have memorized. So, or because we keep everything stored on our phones, before you head out to an action that's going to be heavily policed, you can write the name and the attorney's phone number on your arm or your hand in Sharpie. If they try to gouge you or engage in casual conversation or start lying to you about what just happened, like they'll say, oh, I saw you throwing rocks, I saw you pushing people, I saw you, X, Y, and Z. Uh, do not take the bait. We'll talk a little bit. We already spoke about the legality. Cops are allowed to lie to you. You're not allowed to talk to the cops. Do we have access to lawyers as international students? I would ask my supervising Mudassir, is that true? They are allowed access to lawyers as international students, correct?
Yeah, there's no difference in terms of your right to have a lawyer for non-citizens or citizens, even if you're undocumented. If the question is when are you granted like an attorney, meaning given one by the government because, like, let's say you're arrested, that's after you're arrested. So like that right won't necessarily apply like if they're just coming to your home and trying to speak to you. In that situation, you can contact other attorneys who do this work. You can contact Clear. We represent people in those situations.
And what if we haven't contacted a lawyer before we visit a protest? That's also a very good question to ask. that's why, you know, we're doing this KYR today with you guys as clear, and because of what's been going on with Palestine and all that sort of thing. So consider yourself protected as clear, uh, as clients of Clear. You don't have to consult with a lawyer beforehand. We do advise for talking to an immigration lawyer beforehand if you are, and you know, on a visa, student visa, or not a legally permanent resident in that sort of sense. It would be best practice to talk to an immigration attorney about participating in an action. But if you're a citizen and you have you don't have to contact a lawyer before you go to an action. Everything we're telling you is not to steer you away from participating in protests. You know, like Harshini said, as being inside the United States and being in the United States, you are allowed a First Amendment protection. So you don't have to contact an attorney, but we're here giving you this KYR, so you don't have to consult with us. If you are stopped later on, you can just give them the phone number of Clear or the National Lawyers Guild phone number of Chicago if you don't have to contact them beforehand. I hope that answers your question. No problem. So, you know, give them an attorney's number, like Clear, put that on your arm. And, you know, if they're trying to gouge you and ask you questions, don't take the bait. Just tell them I'm not talking to you without an attorney present. And number 3 is do not consent to a search. If you are stopped or arrested, the police may conduct a search of your person and items immediately associated with your person. What does that mean? It means your book bag. They can search your book bag. They can search your fanny pack if you have one. They can search your purse if you have that on you at the protest. So that's what it means when, you know, they can the person or items associated with that person. And we're going back to rule 1. If they are searching you, do not physically resist the search in any way. But do say and do invoke that golden rule of saying, I do not consent to this search. You want to say it loud and clear, like not loud in a way that people around you, or if they're on the street and they hear and they see what's going on, you want to say it loudly, clearly that you do not consent to this search. I do not consent to this search. And do not consent to DNA collection. So what does that look like? The police may ask you outright for a sample, like spit in this cup. For whatever reason, they would ask you that at a protest. Or they may try to covertly obtain by offering you gum, drinks, cigarettes, water bottles, coffee, food. If they do, it's best practice to refuse. 4, do not consent. Do not answer any questions or sign any papers without a lawyer present. So similarly, you don't want to answer any questions when they're asking you, and you don't want to sign anything without a lawyer present too. You have the right to decline. The right to decline whatever they want you to sign, that is, and you have the right to decline any questioning. If you decide to speak with them, it can be used against you. Say, I won't say or do anything without my lawyer. You know, golden rule number 2. Sometimes cops will ask you to sign a document. It'll be waiving your Miranda rights. You know, we advise against signing or initialing that as well. They might tell you to sign or initial it to acknowledge that, you know, your rights were read to you. But you are under no obligation to sign any piece of paper that the police give you. Next slide. So another role-playing scenario. We're going to act out a scenario in which a protester is approached by law enforcement at a protest on a sidewalk. Pay close attention to the choices made here. I'm gonna be the law enforcement in this scenario, and Harshini is gonna be the person participating in the action. So we're gonna start. Hey, stop right there.
Am I under arrest?
I need you to stop.
Am I free to leave?
Do you have a permit?
We're marching on a public sidewalk without using any sound amplification, and so I don't need a permit. Am I free to leave?
I don't know about that.
Am I free to leave?
Say, are you one of the organizers of this?
Am I free to leave?
Hand me your phone.
I didn't bring my phone. Am I free to leave?
You didn't bring a phone?
No, I didn't bring my phone. Am I free to leave?
That's weird. I don't believe you.
Am I free to leave or am I being detained?
You know what? You can go.
See.
And scene. Okay, so we're gonna ask you guys, feel free to drop it in the chat or, raise your hands if you want. What felt good about this interaction and what could have been done better in this interaction? He asked if she was free to leave. Am I free to leave? Yes, that's very good. Harshini kept asking that if she's free to leave because they can't detain her without reasonable suspicion. What else? What are some good things that Harshini did in this encounter? Asking if she was detained. Yes, so Harshini did a great job in this encounter. I kept asking her questions. She didn't answer the questions, and she kept asking if she was free to leave or if she was being detained. So that's a very good response to give to law enforcement they're while they're asking you these questions. She did so repeatedly. She did so in a tone that wasn't very confrontational. Um, so there's one thing that we want to point out was this question of when I asked her to hand over her phone. So she said I did not bring my phone, and she asked if she was free to leave. This, even though saying anything else in that situation, may seem like innocent enough to say like I didn't bring it, but if she said I didn't bring it and she indeed brought that phone and things had escalated into a way that they would have to detain her and she would have been caught lying to law enforcement when she said that. She said I don't have my phone, but in actuality she had her phone. So um it gives them the law enforcement their leeway to use their tactics against you in that situation. So don't give them any more information that you already have or know. Like if you have your phone, just keep asking, like, am I being detained? Am I free to leave? Instead of saying I didn't bring my phone, she could have just said, am I free to leave? Am I being detained? Um, so yeah, that's something she could have done better in that situation. And what we can move on to the next slide.
Sorry, do we want to do it with one of the participants? Hello?
So I guess does anyone want to participate in the same scenario? Well, I'll be the law enforcement and I stop you on the street. Does anyone want to participate or raise their hand to participate?
Hey, I'll do it again if no one else wants to.
Sofiane, you said you want to participate. Is that still true?
All right.
You can unmute yourself in that if you want to.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Okay, so instead of Harshini being the person participating in this action, it'll be Sufyan. So let's see if Sufyan was able to retain any of the information that we had given in this scenario. So, we're gonna do it again. So, hey, stop right there.
Hi.
I need you to stop right there.
Okay, am I being detained? Am I free to leave?
I just need you to stop.
All right, I'm stopped. Am I being detained or am I free to leave?
Uh, do you have a permit for what you're doing?
Am I being detained or am I free to leave?
Are you one of the people that are organizing this march?
Am I being detained or am I free to leave?
You know what? I don't like your attitude. Give me your phone right now.
Am I being detained or am I free to leave?
You got a lot of smart answers. I need you to answer some of my questions. What are you doing at this protest?
Am I being detained or am I free to leave?
You can go.
Thank you.
All right. So, virtual claps.
Thank you was a great touch. I love it.
Yeah. He did a great job. He did everything that Harshini didn't do in the sense of giving information that wasn't supposed to be given, in the sense of when I asked him to give me his phone, he didn't say anything like, "Oh, I don't have it," or he just kept asking and being a broken record. He kept saying, "Am I free to leave? Am I being detained? Am I free to leave? Am I being detained?" Until, I was like, "You can go. I don't have any more questions for you." Next slide.
Okay, so this is my turn, but actually, since we've reached sort of like a stopping point-ish in the presentation, I just wanted to quickly ask if people had any questions before we moved on, since I know that we haven't really been stopping for questions all that much. So feel free to drop it in the chat if you have any pressing questions at this time.
I also enabled the Q&A mode, so if anybody wants to submit questions through there, it'll also give you the option to send it anonymously. And it'll only be visible to the co-hosts who are presenting.
If
Sundos,
you
I know
guys
you asked the question. I know you asked the question in regards of like, marching on a street. Do you tell them the organizers gained permission for us to march? Again, everyone seemed to you sort of got an answer. You don't have to say anything or don't say anything in that sense. You don't have to answer their questions. You just keep if they tell you to stop, you stop, but you ask if you're being detained. But if not, you can just, keep going. You don't have to answer their questions in that sense.
Okay, so we got one question, yay for us. But someone asked, do any of these rights change when you are protesting on a college campus? Generally, like your right to First Amendment in itself, like won't change, though under certain circumstances, the school can like limit how or like possibly discipline you for that, but that's like school student speech and the First Amendment is a whole other thing. But when you are protesting on campus, think the what's allowed might change because the school or the university might have certain policies in place. So if you are organizing protests or if you are part of a protest, we would suggest checking your university policies to see if certain actions or certain things are allowed. I hope that answers your question.
We have a question. If we are concealing our identity using a mask or kofia or scarf or something along the lines like that, do cops have the right to ask us to unconceal or take off our covering? And do we do it? So this is a question we've been asked a lot about recently, specifically with what's going on in Palestine. The best way, so what you should know is that you're allowed to cover your face from here down, as like COVID, as a COVID restriction, you can't. So that's an answer to a question. They don't have you can cover your face like this. It's perfectly fine. Given that we just had a pandemic, people still cover their faces even in public places like that. Specifically, if a cop asks you to take it off or to unconceal yourself, we've learned that it's best to keep saying to them, like, is that an order? Like, is that a lawful order? Like, keep pressing them on that question, because if it is a lawful order, you have to, or you would ask them this very simple question of, are you going to arrest me if I don't unconceal my face in that manner? So if they say no, then you could keep it on. But if they say yes, you would have to. But you would have to really get it out of them to say that, is this a lawful order, or am I going to be arrested if I don't take this off?
And then I'll answer the next question, which is, will involving in any Palestinian protest affect immigration status in the future as international students? So, as we've spoken about before, there are certain statements that are protected by the First Amendment rights, right? We have like general statements of solidarity, statements generally criticizing Zionism, etc. And those were in the slides before. Those are all allowed, and those are generally what you're seeing at Palestinian protests. The statements that might get you in trouble in terms of immigration benefits were statements, statements supporting terrorist activity, statements for supporting terrorist organizations, or statements materially supporting either of these things. But if you are interested in taking actions and participating in this organizing, and you're a non-citizen, this is why we suggest that you talk to an immigration attorney, Clear or other people, and you can talk with them and talk about how these things might affect your immigration application and how they pertain to your specific situation. So, hope that made sense.
And we have one question in the chat. What if you're walking to campus and a cop approaches you and asks you questions specifically about the situation right now and your involvement in certain organizations on campus or mosques? So this would be, you would highlight those, golden rules and those guidelines we've asked you before. We gave you guys before. So if he approaches you on the street, you don't have to answer. You would ask that question: am I being detained? Am I free to leave? And then you leave in that situation. If they say yes, you can leave. If they kind of give you an unambiguous answer, like, oh, well, we're just trying to talk, we just want some information, we just want to know what's your thoughts, what's your opinion, you don't have, like, you would ask again, am I free to leave? And if they keep asking those questions and not giving you the answer to the question, you would invoke your right to, I'm not going to talk to you without an attorney, or you're going to keep talking to me and I'm not going to give you an answer unless I have an attorney present. So if you're on your way to school and a cop approaches you and asks you about those things, you would answer them with, I'm not going to talk to you without an attorney present, or, am I being detained? So then you can just leave and get out of the situation so you don't give any information. So if you're on the street and they approach you, you can still invoke your right to a lawyer and answering their questions. You don't have to answer their questions without a lawyer. Can they escalate the situation to keep me there? They obviously, law enforcement has a wide range of what they can and can't do in that situation, but you have to, like, things you should remember is to stay calm in that situation. So every time you say, am I free to leave or am I being detained, you want to do so in a calm manner and in a way that it's not taken as like hostile towards police officers or that sort of thing. So emphasizing, you have to remember to stay calm when you ask these questions. They're stopping you, you want to go, you're like, hey, am I free to leave? Am I being detained? And if they keep asking you questions, just be like, okay, you're going to keep asking me questions, but respectfully, I'm not answering your questions without a lawyer present, or I'm not going to consult to give you any information that you want without a lawyer present. So can they escalate the situation to keep you there? not like obviously law enforcement can do as it has like a very wide range of what they can do and they can't do, but you would just have to be calm. Every situation is different, but staying calm and telling them like I'm not going to answer any questions without a lawyer present, or I'm if you free to leave, that's the best way to sort of get around answering those questions and giving information. So hope that answers your question.
Remember what we said at the beginning of the presentation, way back when, which is that the guidelines and the advice that we are giving apply when any sort of law enforcement officer approaches you. And these three guidelines can be used in almost any situation involving law enforcement. So yeah, just wanted to add that.
And we have one question in the Q&A. Is law enforcement allowed to deny us from putting posters on the ground, poles, or any type of public property? Are they allowed to detain us for doing so? Also, what / if any are the risks involved when participating in a die-in? So
I
know
definitely
Mandasa, do you want to answer that question? I saw you're kind of like typing to answer it.
Yeah, so local laws are going to vary with respect to your right to put posters on public property. In New York City, for example, there are restrictions on being able to put it on like crosswalk signs or things like that. So you should check the local laws of like the town or the city that you're in about posting material on public property. If it is a violation, usually they're very low violations, meaning like low level violations, not even like misdemeanors or just like things that give you a ticket. Unfortunately, that could be the basis for law enforcement to try to detain you. But again, that just as you know, we've been repeating over and over again, that doesn't change the calculus or change the advice, right? You don't answer questions, you just ask if you're free to leave. If that's the basis, take the ticket and get out of there, right? Like if that's the worst that's gonna happen is that they're gonna write like a small petty like ticket for you because you did that, then you know it's okay. That should not escalate to an arrest. And with respect to risks involved, I guess I don't know. I'm not familiar with the die-in. If it's like a direct action type of scenario where you're anticipating actually disrupting some process that normally takes place at your school or in other locations, like there was you know the protest by Jewish Voices for Peace in Washington D.C. where they went into like a government building, another protests like that that are meant to draw attention. I think there are risks involved, but generally in situations like this, if there is a plan to engage in some form of protest action, which you anticipate could lead to some escalation or lead to an arrest, planning should be done with like your local National Lawyers Guild chapter, other attorneys, just to be prepared, have them prepared in advance of that. And I also see Emma is typing an answer. Maybe she's gonna clarify what I don't know about die-ins.
I just wanted to add one quick
Sure.
of clarification. Just about die-ins, like I know typically a lot of students, a lot of activists on college campuses engage in like die-ins and like those types of activities. And for public college campuses, like that is First Amendment protected speech. I think like Modesta alluded to, like it varies in terms of like doing it in the public street and like disrupting some flow of like normal business, but on college campuses, which is where we frequently see things like die-ins, that would be protected free speech.
Thanks for clarifying. And I think just to connect this back to a previous question, which Harshini and Sammy were provided a very thorough answer to, just to add a caveat to like the question about international students. So as international students, your participation in a full course of study is like the basis for you to be able to stay in the United States. And so there is a bit more of like a necessity or what we would say, we would just generally advise like looking more into your school's like student handbook to make sure that you're complying with the terms, so that, you know, in your protest related activity, they can't come around and use that as a basis to, you know, initiate academic discipline against you, which could potentially affect your immigration status. And generally speaking, for the rights that you have on campuses, if you're planning activity, it's wise to get really familiar with like your students' policies and be familiar with you know, what are the processes that you have to follow in order to engage in any type of like you know, public protest. And if there are like guidelines about things that you can't do, and being mindful of how to navigate those.
Thank you for that. There is one other question in the Q&A, and that's, is it wise to publicly support Hamas? And similarly to what we've been saying, the consequences between non-citizens and citizens is going to be different. So technically, as we said before, under the First Amendment, you have a right to support, you can say that you support foreign, like designated foreign terrorist organizations, as long as you are not materially supporting them and you're not doing so under the direction of said agency. However, there's, is it why, oh, thank you for the clarification. Said for a citizen. So I'm just going to continue with the thought just for a bit. Again, for non-citizens, this could have the impacts on your immigration benefits, and that could adversely impact your immigration application. So that's like one side of it. For citizens, it's a risk that you have to think about, because we are talking about criminal penalties here, like criminal penalties here, right? But there might still be, you know, social, right, or like maybe workplace penalties that you might see, or like different consequences. So essentially, it's about weighing, you know, what you're willing to say and what you're not willing to say. I don't know if that makes sense, and if anyone else wants to add on to my answer.
Yeah, I'll just add, I think in addition, so I mean, one of the ways to think about your First Amendment rights, and there's different categories or different buckets of risk that you might encounter. And so there's criminal liability risk, there's immigration consequences or potential immigration consequences. And then there's this like catch-all of like other things, right? And Harshini alluded to a couple of those things, right? Employment consequences, academic consequences, social consequences, being ostracized on social media, being doxxed, etc. But there's also the unintended, you know, consequence that results that you may fall, you know, under law enforcement's radar now, right? Because you've expressed those statements, and so that doesn't only impact you; it impacts the rest of your community. It impacts any student organizations you're in, and for those reasons, we generally advise against, you know, putting any public statements like that, because even if it's lawful, even if it's not going to put you in particular at like risk of being arrested or charged, it is, you know, likely to lead to law enforcement scrutiny, right? And we know that the FBI, for example, and other law enforcement agencies scrape social media information. So even if you are thinking that you're anonymous, if they see that there's a public account that's expressing this type of support, they have means to figure out whose account it is, and then you may be, you know, followed up, and there might be law enforcement looking into you, right? And that, like we said, doesn't just impact you; it impacts other people as well.
Thank you for that addition. If there are no other questions, I will move on to our important notes. So first and foremost, please keep in mind that you can assert your rights at any point during the interaction. As we've said before, just because you forget to do it at the beginning doesn't mean that you've lost those rights forever. You're always allowed to assert these rights. And keep in mind that the outcome of such interactions can sometimes depend on small aspects, your attitude, your body language. So even though it kind of feels gross, saying things like, yes, officer, no, officer, can be helpful for some people when dealing with law enforcement. But of course, this doesn't always mean that the police will treat you respectfully. Next, be ready to repeat yourself. Sammy has said this many times throughout the presentation. um, which makes sense, but you need to be ready to repeat yourself. Talking to law enforcement can feel like talking to a child, but keep the faith, just keep pushing those big golden rules. If they are asking you for your permission, the police need it. And remember that asking permission doesn't always sound like asking. It could be an order. Open the door, pop your trunk. And you have a lot more power in these situations than you realize. Because police officers know that you don't have to speak to them, but they're trying to bet on the fact that you might not know your rights. So just by knowing your rights, you have like a lot more power in this situation. And be truthful. Don't lie to an officer. As we said in this presentation, it is a crime to lie to federal law enforcement. And then the next one would be observant. As we said, you can think of yourself as a reporter, a journalist who is documenting an event. You need to capture as many details as possible. So figure out what agency the officer is from. Are they local police, FBI, ICE? Remember the officer's badge number and name. Look at their badge. See if they have a business card, and record everything you remember as soon as you can. So that could be writing it down or recording a voice note. And as we have said, in Illinois, you are not required to provide your name if a law enforcement asks you out on the street or in public. However, the police can take you to a precinct to verify your identity if you do not give them a name. As we discussed, this is not true in your home, where you do not need to confirm your name or provide ID. And if they do ask for ID, give the ID with the least amount of information possible. So your school ID or a library card. It's anything with a name and picture on it. If you are not a citizen, do not provide foreign ID or any ID that shows you were not born in the United States. And finally, if you're undocumented or otherwise at risk for deportation, confirming your name to ICE is enough for them to arrest you. Because of this, if you are undocumented, it is extra important to give them ID that would not reveal your documentation status. And also, please keep this in mind when you decide on whether to participate in actions that are directly or heavily policed. And overall, the goal of this is to stay calm and get out of the situation unharmed. Exit quickly and safely. There is a question in the chat. And it says, if you give them a school ID and they want more info, can they take you to a precinct? I think this goes back to what Sammy was talking about, where if you give them the school ID and they say, we want more information, that's when you ask, again, am I free or am I being detained? Right? And you ask this question. And if they say like, no, you must come to the station with us, and asking, is that an order? Will you arrest me if I don't agree to come with you? And, going ahead with that.
Yeah, and usually when you give them your ID, your school ID, what's important to know is that they'll only really, like what we said before, they'll take you to the station if you don't give them any identification. So when you give them a school ID, that's you identifying yourself as this person, but but it's the very minimum information they need. Usually, like what we said before, is they'll take you down to the station to like verify that identity. But if you give them something like a school ID usually we have like pictures on our school IDs, that's enough information for them to know, like, okay, you're this person, X, Y, and Z. And then if they do take you to the station, that's where you assert your rights again. Like, I'm not going to talk to you without an attorney. You can keep, like, I'm not going to talk to you without an attorney, or they have like, someone else come down there for you. But your ID, your school ID with the very minimal information of your name and a picture, I guess, should not put you in a situation where they need to take you down to the precinct, I guess, if that also answers your question. Can't they report you to the school though, and then you face academic consequences, or is it safer than another form of ID? I guess in this scenario, can you face academic consequences? I'm not really I'm not really sure about like what type of academic consequences you would face when giving them your school ID. At most, it just kind of opens up to like, I go to this school. Um, it's safer than giving them like a state ID where it has your residence per se, or if you're a non-citizen, if you give them any other form of ID that has a little bit more information than needed be, um, it puts you still at risk. So you want to give as little information as possible when encountering law enforcement. Academic consequences, I'm not entirely sure, but you do want to, like, when you do encounter law enforcement, you don't want to give more information than needed. You kind of just want to confirm your name, and that's it. Like, this is my name and here's a school ID. I'm not giving you an ID with anything else on it because this is a valid sort of form of identification.
Yeah, sorry, just to chime in very quickly, like in terms of when we say little information, that's also based on your judgment call and what you think is the information that you don't want being shared. So for example, as attorneys, we may have like an attorney card, right? Or like a bar card, and that has our bar number. And I might not want that information to be known by law enforcement if they stop me, right? I don't want them to know that I'm an attorney and then they try to like, put a complaint out against me or something like that. So I might decide that I'm more comfortable with them knowing my address, my home address that's on like my driver's license than that information. So the judgment call is on your end. The one sort of like red line though, as Sammy mentioned and has been talked about throughout this presentation, is if you're a non-citizen, don't show any type of ID that indicates that you were not born in the United States. So that's the red line that applies across the board. But other than that, if it's like a choice between like a high school ID versus a state identification versus like a work ID, like it could be from your employer, like that's up to you to decide what you feel what you feel most comfortable sharing.
Okay, great. So that is the end of the presentation. Congrats on getting through all of that. So yeah, thanks for inviting us. On the next slide, you will see our email and our phone number. So feel free to contact us if you have questions or if you need representation at these two things. Please follow us on Twitter and Instagram. We're at CUNY_clear. And it would be cool if you did, because we're putting out new one-pagers and new content that explains a lot of the information that we've talked about in this presentation, as well as extra information. And through this presentation, we hope that you learn something about your rights. As we've said, simply knowing about your rights can really help you protect your community and yourself. So now that you are equipped with this information, we hope that you can play an important role by, spreading it around and teaching others about it. And yeah, we will be on the Zoom to answer questions. But I do see the question in the chat. Could this be the number we put down when they ask us for an attorney number? Yes, you are allowed to do that. Please do that. But yeah, that's the end of the presentation. I hope everyone enjoyed and learned something.
And you can also put, to answer that question too, you can also put the National Lawyers Guild. If there's one in Chicago, we suggest putting the NLG's phone number for Chicago chapter on your arm, or when you want to ask for an attorney, so you can put both if you want to.
Thank you so much, Sami, Harshini, Ahmed, Mudassar, for joining us, for going through this presentation, for answering our questions. Really appreciate you guys taking your time to do this for us. As mentioned, the chat is still open if anyone has any questions, but we really do appreciate all of you joining us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, if there's no questions, I guess I'll go ahead and end the call. But thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
Bye.